August 10th, 2007, the date of the backup version of RuneScape 2 that would later go on to be used to create Old School RuneScape. Ever since Old School's creation, we've had quite a few updates, some of which only made possible because of the backup version used. Now the question is, what if we went back in time, and Jagex decided to make that backup a year earlier, on August 10th, 2006. As you can imagine, the game and all its future updates would look quite a bit different. And because of that, there's a lot to talk about, so let's get into it. So before I start actually explaining the major differences, I'd like to thank Redditor LordGozer2 for creating this thread that creates most of the points I'm going to go over. Anyway, first is how different the map would look. Comparing it to the original map of Old School, there's definitely a few places missing, namely Feldip Hills, Dorgesh Khan, and biggest of all, the Fremennik Isles. As a result, that means the Nay Tis Not Helm that everyone seems to love wouldn't exist. I imagine it would get pulled in later, but there's a good chance the Isles themselves would never exist due to how small Old School's development team is. As for the previously mentioned Feldip Hills, most of you who have been there know it's a pretty major hunting area. In the backup from 2006, hunting just wouldn't exist at all. It wasn't actually added into RuneScape until a few months after the backup. Chances are, the 2006 backup would have traces of the skill, but it wouldn't be complete, unlike the 2007 version. In my opinion, if that were the case, hunting would go on to become Old School's first skill. Up next is all the quests that the game would be missing. There's too many to say all the names, so I'm just gonna list them on screen now, and just list a couple notable ones. A few of those are definitely Animal Magnetism, the Fremennik Isles, and King's Ransom. Without Animal Magnetism, we wouldn't have everyone's favorite backpack, Ava's Accumulator. I specifically remember doing this quest back in the day just so I could wear it as a fashionscape item. As for King's Ransom, without it we wouldn't have the Piety Prayer, but as the author of this thread points out, it would probably be pulled in eventually. Moving on, we have the game's graphics. First is that iconic 2006 overlay. Nowadays, that overlay is available in basically every major custom client for any of those that prefer it over the current one. The overlay isn't the only thing that would be different though. So many of the game's NPCs would have pretty different models. For example, things like goblins, demons, dragons, imps, spiders, guards, and the list just goes on and on. Along with NPCs, things like certain items and armor would look different too. There's dozens, maybe hundreds more I could list, but it would just take way too long. This year gap would also affect combat pretty significantly. We'd be missing a lot of items, some of which are actually considered best in slot for the time. A few examples of these items are the Fighter Torso, Barrel Chest Anchor, Dragon Arrows, Dragon Darts, Dark Bow, Dragon Fire Shield, Dragon Full Helm, Berserker Necklace, and so much more. In terms of how the game would sound, it would actually be a little bit different too. Everyone's favorite song, Sea Shanty 2, is an example of that. Nothing too major, but definitely noticeable. We'd be missing at least a few more music tracks due to songs released alongside some of the missing quests. Other updates made after 2006 but before the 2007 backup would also include things like Barbarian Training, the Karamja Achievement Diaries, the Varrock Museum expansion, which included the Kudo system, and last of all, Clan Chat. Clan Chat was one of the things last added before the 2007 backup, but I wouldn't be too surprised if it would go on to be the first update added if the 2006 backup was used. So far we've just looked at updates that would happen in between 2006 and 2007. Some future updates would also be affected by when the backup was made. One of the biggest updates of all would be that we may have never gotten God War's Dungeon. The update was nearly completed in the backup that Jagex chose to use, which is really the only reason such a small team was able to push out such a massive update in such short time. If the backup was from 2006, they'd have absolutely nothing in terms of God Wars, and we'd likely never get it. I have a feeling we'd eventually get some of the items that you can get at God Wars, but definitely not the dungeon itself. Even if we did, it would take months, maybe even years of development time to recreate it. The author also points out that originally there was nothing for the Corporal Beast in the backup. As a result, the graphics team spent weeks recreating the model from scratch. In the past, players have also suggested adding dungeoneering to Old School RuneScape, which would supposedly take up to a year of development time. There's a lot more updates I could talk about, but this video would end up becoming probably more like a half hour long. But for everyone interested in learning more, I'll link Lord Gozer's Reddit post down below. It's a pretty detailed and interesting look into RuneScape's history. On screen now is actually a list of every update during this time period, which is also available in the post, but feel free to pause the video now if you want to read it. Anyway, that's gonna do it for today's video. As always, here's a huge shout out to all my Patreon supporters, whose names are, as usual, on screen now. Don't forget to drop a like, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next video.